Thanks, Pat. Russia and the Islamic terrorists of ISIS topped the agenda as those G7 leaders met in Germany this weekend. While sanctions against Russia will be maintained, some leaders may be starting to question America's strategy on foreign policy. Gary Lane has that story.
Russia missed the summit for the second year in a row. That's because the leaders of the world's top industrialized democracies kicked Moscow out of their annual meeting after it annexed Crimea from Ukraine. Russia was further isolated when the G7 imposed sanctions against it last year. That's because the country was involved in the annexation of Crimea and in arming pro-Russian rebels in Ukraine. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, host of this year's summit, shared a beer with President Obama Sunday in the German Alps. President Obama revealed what was on his mind.
Standing up to Russian aggression in Ukraine.
Both Mr. Obama and the German Chancellor agreed sanctions against Russia should not be lifted until President Putin fully implements terms of the peace accord reached in Minsk last February. Putin says the West has nothing to fear from Russia. Its actions in Crimea, Ukraine, and elsewhere are simply defensive, not offensive actions. Some European officials agree, and they may move to weaken the sanctions against Russia, with or without the United States and Germany. Also of concern to the G7 leaders, the war against the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The general in charge of the effort to recapture Ramadi and other areas in Anbar province says the Iraqi military has secured the defensive lines leading to Baghdad. Still, some of the European leaders don't think President Obama's strategy is working. And with ISIS making gains in both Iraq and Syria, and Russia's Putin flexing his muscle in Ukraine and around the world, President Obama's foreign policy decisions are being called into question, not only by critics in the U.S., but also by some of America's closest allies. Gary Lane, CBN News.